What is up, Fanatics? It's 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and that means another episode of Home Theater Fanatics Live. Tonight is episode 119, and we have an amazing episode for you. Joining us today, live in living color from Metra AV, is Brent McCall. How you doing, man? How are you?
How you doing? First up, before you get any further, I am so glad the camera was not on during your countdown, because that's some cool music. I was just going for it, man.
I sometimes I get a little bit of some of this action going on, and the road. Yeah, I don't want anybody to see that mess.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to death that the cameras weren't on, but that's pretty. That's a cranking intro there.
It's pretty swanky. I agree. It pumps
Swanky
up the
mode.
crowds. Yeah, I mean, and they go crazy. But anyway, talking about crazy. No, I'm kidding. Welcome to the show. Very happy to have you on.
Thank you, sir.
And maybe we can get started with a little bit of who is Brent? Because people are like, who is this guy? I don't know this guy.
Who's that old guy?
Yeah, what's going on?
I am what they call the legacy dude here at Metra.
The legacy dude.
The legacy dude. Because I'm, not young.
When somebody wants to pull out like an old connector, they're like, BNC.
What is this? Yeah.
Exactly. That's funny.
What is stereo? So, yes.
Quadraphonic sound.
I have been at this one way or another since high school, 1975.
Right on. I was alive.
Players. Yeah, thank you. Installing 8-track players, then cassette decks. Started professionally working in retail when I was in the Army stationed at Fort Bragg in the 82nd in 1978.
Right on.
So one way or another, since that time, I have been in originally hi-fi, stereo, and then became video in the mid 90s with satellite and then surround sound. Well, really mid 80s, I sold my first Dolby system, which wasn't Dolby Digital as we think of it now. It was just simply left minus right with a 70 millisecond delay and left plus right for the center.
Right. I'm sure we got some people in the crowd right now saying, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
The Shure 5000, the old Luxmans. You bought a unit and you had to have a second amp just for the rears because the receivers were only 5 watts a channel for the rear speakers.
The good old days.
Yeah.
Right on. And, through your career, through the nooks and crannies and the twists and turns, you eventually arrived at Metra.
I did. And it's one of these things that had you said 30 years ago, what are you going to be doing with your life? Doing HDMI engineering and tech support was nowhere in my thought process. I wound up here simply because the gentleman that owns all of this, which is primarily a car audio accessory manufacturing company, had put in a heck of a theater in his house. In fact, it's in Theo Calamarakis' first book.
Okay.
Is the theater that belongs to the owner. And the previous integrator found it prudent to leave town. I got called in by one of the manufacturers to see if I could resolve some issues.
That sounds like some mob stuff right there. You got to get out of town,
not quite that, but he was definitely in over his head.
Sure.
And the homeowner just kept asking for, can we do this? Can we do this? And an advantage of being a legacy guy and having done this for a long time is having to find solutions, particularly in the early days of automation.
Sure.
Working with relays and protecting backfeeds with diodes that nobody worried about coming into the 2000s, and this job required them. One thing led to another. I got called in. Tell us what you do and how Metra as a company can help people like you. And that was November of 2001.
Oh, right on. So 20 years now.
Department. I've been with the company 22, but this company, this brand, Ethereal Metra Home Theater, officially started in November of 2001.
Right on. Very cool, man. That's awesome. Now, for folks that aren't familiar with Metra, I mean, you guys, like you just said, have been around for, I don't want to say around forever, but you've got a long tenure.
75 years.
Right. Well, you've been around forever.
And in fact, in the very early days, Metra Electronics was a TV repair and supply company. They did knobs, parts, pieces for TV repair shops.
Right.
And then in the 60s moved into car audio parts and pieces, the same thing, knobs, antennas, and it just grew into dash kits, wire harnesses, things like that.
Sure.
So the fact we kind of wound up back where we started.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And the whole thing started as a way to create new things for the homeowner, for the guy that owns the company.
Oh, right, right. He's all like, I'm just going to start a business because I want this, and nobody's selling it. Nice.
We don't do receivers. We don't do speakers. I don't sell televisions or sources. We're the connect products, you know, the cables, the bulk wire, things like that. And the HDMI, which I'm sure we'll get into a little deeper, but we're the solutions. If you've got a problem, we have a way to make the HDMI work.
You know, next time you say that, you should say, if you've got a problem, yo, I'll solve it.
Well, we try to. HDMI, you know, HDMI is one of these things that's never the same thing twice.
Oh, yeah. And, you know, so in the tech question segment, so the tech question of the week segment, I'm going to ask specifically about HDMI, but I think we can talk a little bit about that as we move through stuff too. But, you know, going back to Metra AV, you know, if correct me if I'm wrong, but if anybody's ever been to CEDIA, you guys are there, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you have a pretty big pavilion there too, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you go to CEDIA, you'll see our products and Barco and Sony and D&M and JVC. We're all over the place because particularly it shows the exhibitors want their stuff to work.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to be embarrassed by a brand new flagship product not functioning.
Sure. Absolutely.
So we go out, I will go out on, for example, the 27th for CEDIA this year, which is well before the show, just to make sure that all the guys, all the other displays.
Right.
So I've got the fix-it tool through the cables, the extenders, all the things. If they've got any kind of problem, we can fix it, and they're not scrambling the last night.
Yo, he'll solve it. So that's an old rap song.
Yo, he'll solve it.
Yeah. If anybody out there that's watching it can name that song, the name of that tune, and maybe the artist, you win the free thumbs up of the night, because I don't have a price. But yeah, that's
it won't be me, I can promise you.
Right on. No, it was it's circa 19. Oh man, it's got to be like super early 90s. No, I don't think it's late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, it's a super classic line. Okay, so let me so I'm gonna pull up. Let me share this out real quick. Share screen. Chrome tab, Metra Home Theater Group. Share. All right. Oh, are we there? Are we seeing
look at that? Hey, there's my website.
Yeah, there you are, dude. 12-year warranty and 4 real 4K game experience on the Helios. I like the color scheme, man. I like the red and black. That's
there's some interesting. Hold that page just a second, because this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
You see we went past it, but
inside
the head shell was a little colored dot.
Okay, so I'm going to try and tell me when I get to the right one.
One more.
That one?
That one.
Okay,
that one. You see the little dot in the right-hand side one, the red?
Yeah, on the source side of the HDMI cable?
Actually, there are 6 different colors in each package, so you can color code your cable.
No!
So you know what they go to. You're not having to put tape on it or numbers that fall off. Those are little snap-in things that...
Oh, I see it. Yeah, the color code system.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. I didn't come up with that. The lady that runs our department, Jessie Crabb, it was her idea. And it's like, that's one of the smartest damn things I have seen. It's not technology. It's just convenience.
Okay. So,
and it's just such a great idea.
Looking at this cable, you know, there are a few things that I like about it. So you don't know this yet, but I'm going to contact somebody that sells these Metra AV cables, and I'm going to holistically swap out on the back of my gear on my rack, because my cables suck. But how universal is that connecting screw on the back of
I would love it to be fully universal. There are essentially 2 types of HDMI plugs available for manufacturers.
Right.
Do you mind if I switch to an overhead real quick?
No, and I'll bring you full screen here so people can see exactly. I bet you can. Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, now see, this is kind of tough for me because I can never hit the camera. But if you see this screw right here,
exactly, yeah, and all of my processor equipment has HDMI, and it has that
Now,
screw above it with a screw in
but
it.
see, not all items do. It depends on who provides
Oh,
your terminal. Now, the advantage of the screw terminal is if you're an AVR manufacturer, a matrix manufacturer, something like that, it gives you an additional point of stability, not just for the cable, but typically there'll be a screw in there in the back of the AVR, the matrix, or whatever. So it keeps the terminal from getting pushed in, because the terminal really effectively floats on the circuit board with the 18 pins.
sure.
It is, because it's not meant to be cram stuff in and go with it. It's meant to have a little bit of gingerness to it when you go in.
Right.
So that screw terminal is a huge plus, and it did not exist in the early days.
Yeah. So
It wasn't until
I would use that to connect. So I would put it in there and then just screw it in instead of, jamming it all the way. Yeah.
Here's the problem with that, and why they did not do that out of the gate. I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you know exactly what terminal the HDMI was developed around for pulse strength and stability? There was a terminal
I was going to
already on
guess,
the
but
market.
I have, it was designed from another existing terminal.
The stability and pulse strength came from another terminal straight off the spec.
Well, I don't know, like DVI or something. I don't know.
DVI was screwable, USB.
Oh, really?
Yep. Now, here was the original thought. You're going to go from 3 to 6 feet in an HDMI cable. It's never going to move. How many times does your mouse pull out of your laptop or your desktop?
Sure.
This was their reasoning.
Right.
Now, they did not think about, okay, well, we got to get 19 pieces of wire into this thing.
Sure.
It's not going to be a USB size cable. They didn't think, well, somebody's going to want to go 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 feet. It's not a matter of saying we don't want you to do this. They were looking at Walmart, Sears, Best Buy, Circuit City customers.
Right.
They're going to buy a TV. It's going to sit on a credenza. The cable box or Blu-ray player is going to sit underneath it. That's it.
Sure.
The
Okay.
whole
So
theater industry was completely ignored, not by intent, but by lack of understanding and knowledge.
it makes sense. I can totally see it. But these things that you're saying are like kicking off the wheels in my head, because to me, HDMI is like this black box of craziness, because, sometimes stuff works and sometimes it doesn't. And people have a hard time with it. Even I do. Like I've got a kaleidoscope, and one HDMI cable I have that works with everything else in the world. I plug it into this guy, and I get audio drops from time to time.
Well, see, here's the thing. And I'm not going to pick on one of the most common consumer forums, but there is a motto out there, a mantra, if you will. Digital is digital. It either works or it doesn't.
Okay.
And from a pure engineering standpoint, assuming everything is correct, that is an accurate motto. However, it isn't, because manufacturers vary tremendously. And we're going to take a basic one. I'm going to guess somewhere in your early 40s.
Thank you.
Now,
you're very kind and generous.
Look at this. So you go out to dinner with half a dozen of your friends, and some of them are 30, some of them are 50.
Sure.
Now, I'm going to guarantee you somebody in that table is going to be talking that you're not going to hear well.
Mm-hmm.
But the guy next to you has no problem at all.
Sure.
Because his thresholds are lower. Meaning
he's got new gear.
Right. As you age, your threshold goes up, meaning that signal has to be stronger.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with HDMI is every single piece of gear has its own threshold level. The standard isn't. It's a very rough, kind of, sort of, it would be nice, but you don't really have to guideline.
Okay.
Now, let's start with that. And we're going to take something simple. This is better. This is nice and tiny. An Apple TV. Now, you assume all Apple TVs are the same because they all come out of a high-tech building, Foxconn in China, and they're all built and everything's perfect. Well, no, they're not. because humidity changes, environmental changes, temperature changes, the quality of a worker on a given day, the change in the flux in the solder, in the bath, the temperature of the bath, all affect everything that goes on in here, particularly the HDMI.
That makes sense. I mean, the temperature of my bath impacts me significantly too, so I get it.
So all that adds up to you can
I got
have the
jokes,
exact.
man. He's all like, please stop.
But I'm just ignoring them, just sliding right through them. So you can have the same identical AVR, the same identical display, the same identical source, and the same identical cables.
Sure.
One system works perfectly, one doesn't. Now, why is that? You can swap cables, and the problem may follow the cable, it may not. You may put another cable on that same source from another identical working one, and it fails. Why is that?
Why? Tell me. I want to know why that is.
Well, the most common thing with HDMI is failures are not a single item. It's not like saying, okay, well, it's Apple TV's fault or the AVR's fault or the TV's fault. It's a cumulative failure. It's kind of the perfect storm of things happening. Now, let's take the basics. We have a circuit board in this. Everything has a circuit board. Now, if one of the traces, for any reason in the manufacturing process, is not identical to the others, and there's 4 primary traces for high-speed video, D0, 1, 2, and 3. In the early days of HDMI, which was up till, I don't know, yesterday, it's red, green, blue, and clock, D0, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
The first 3 are the video channels. The clock is a resync. It basically puts everybody back into marching order.
Sure. Okay.
If one of those channels is a little weak on the circuit board, for any reason, whether it's the circuit just didn't get laid down right, there's a little delamination of the board, anything, that one circuit may be in spec, but just barely. Now, we're going to plug a cable into it. Now, I would love to say that every cable made that's got the HDMI stamp on it is perfectly good cable. Well, it can't be because you can't test every cable. And anybody that's ever been to China and see wire winding machines will realize that on a good day is an optimistic goal.
Sure.
So you've got all these different, red, green, and blue. And when you're winding these cables for HDMI, each of those channels, D0, D1, D2, and D3, is actually 3 conductors. It's like an XLR cable.
Okay. Yep.
So you've got 3 conductors with 4 different colors, D0, D1, D2, and D3, that are getting wrapped and round by different machines, not by the same machine.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, so we've got, let's say, D0 is just a little weak on my Apple TV. Still within spec, but just a little weak. Now, I make a cable. Let's say D0 on that particular run of cables is a little weak. Still within spec, but just a little weak. Now, assuming that my AVR and my next cable and my TV don't have any problems with D0, I'm probably good. But if anything else in that chain has an issue with D0, even if it's all in spec, can cause the failure.
That makes sense.
Now, here's where it gets even more exciting. You mentioned audio. Audio is the idiot light on the dashboard of HDMI. No, literally, it is. It is the first thing to fail on purpose.
Interesting. Okay.
They designed it that way so that you'll know there's a problem. Now, the problem is in EDID. Now,
what did he do?
Exactly. And he didn't. That's the problem. EDID is all the stuff that has to happen in the negotiations, kind of like a divorce.
Sure. Yeah.
To get from one place to another before the audio and the video even start.
So it's funny that you compare HDMI to the divorce rather than the marriage.
Oh, no. Marriage makes a whole lot more sense. That's in the beginning days, everybody's happy.
Sure.
HDMI is a lot more like a divorce because there's a whole lot more criteria that has to be met for things to work.
Okay. Yep.
Now, all this doomsaying isn't really doomsaying because they've pretty much got it figured out on a regular basis. Yes, there's still problems, but if you compare it today to 15 years ago, HDMI
I
is
get it.
phenomenal.
I get it.
And
Yeah.
I've been around long enough at this to hear, well, why don't they just stay with component? It works great. It didn't at the beginning. I promise you. Neither did S video. 6 feet was as
S-video.
far as you could go.
Yeah, I remember the early days of S video. It was not good.
Right. So HDMI progressed a lot faster, and they catch a lot of heat. Some of it deserves, some of it not. There's a lot of stuff out there that's sold on the internet that should not be, because it's not within spec.
Right.
Well, we got to take an email this week. Guy's working with Raspberry Pis.
Mm-hmm.
And when he turns on the Wi-Fi, it blanks out the HDMI cable.
Okay, that's weird.
Well, it isn't, because the Wi-Fi generates a lot of noise.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So does HDMI. When you look at an HDMI cable, all that shielding that's in that cable, do you know the purpose of that shielding?
To protect the signal inside the cable?
You would think that, but no. It's to protect the outside world from the noise that's in that cable.
Okay.
There's a lot of noise in those cables. Now, some outside things can interfere with it, like the Raspberry Pi Wi-Fi section, because on the Raspberry Pi board, it sits right next to the HDMI terminal. We're talking a device that big.
Yeah, super tiny. I had one laying around here. I was going to pick it up and show it, but I think I moved it. Darn.
We love those things. They're a ton of fun for us to play with.
Yeah,
So
I built a number of streamers out of them here, and they're pretty nifty.
When you're doing it directly off the IP port, it's stupid reliable. When you kick the Wi-Fi in, it can be interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I've actually not used any of the Wi-Fi on it ever. I always just use direct to Ethernet.
And you're much better off. So you do have to have additional shielding in the cable or switch to fiber.
So that brings a question up for me. So when you were speaking just a minute ago, you picked it up and you said there, what was it, 19 strands of cable?
Pins.
Yeah, 19 pins. And the first thing that came to mind was, what about the fiber optics HDMI cables? Because certainly they're not running 19 strands of glass in there, are they? So what are they doing? How's that magic work?
Well, first off, because we're not having to run a balanced signal, which is what HDMI is for video.
Sure.
Remember, it's 3 conductors in the video, just like an XLR, send, receive, and a ground. When you look at an RCA cable, it's 2 conductors. So you've got a tip and a ring, and the ring is actually the ground and the return in an RCA cable. That's called an unbalanced cable. Balanced cable, you've got equal send, return, and the ground separate. So the signal ground's completely separate from the signal itself, is separate from the chassis ground.
Okay. Yep.
With fiber, what they're doing is, and I'm going to see if I have a piece laying around here. I don't. But you have what's called a Tosarosa set. That's what takes the incoming electrical signals and actually turns them into lasers.
Right. Yep.
So you'll have a piece of fiber, and we're going to assume this is a piece of fiber just to make my math easy. And the lasers actually go at different angles. There's 3 lasers at different angles for a single fiber, or if you're running a typical fiber system, you have 4 fibers and 4 lasers.
Okay.
This cuts the cost and the complexity way down. Because trying to do multiple lasers, 4 lasers onto a single piece of fiber, gets very pricey.
Sure. Yeah. You do multiple wavelengths inside the fiber. Yeah.
Right. Totally. So what you'll have inside of one of these fibers is 4 individual pieces of glass.
Okay. So it is 4 strands in there then.
It is 4 strands.
That makes sense.
That's D0, D1, D2, and D3.
Okay.
Now, up until about yesterday with HDMI 2.1, the way it worked is you had red, green, blue, and clock. Essentially the old days of component video.
Right. Yep.
Except you had a 4th wire, which takes you back to the older days of coax, which the old projectors either used 4 or 5 conductors, because it could be, you had a separate sync for horizontal and vertical, or separate for both horizontal and vertical.
Yeah, that I know nothing about.
Component just put the horizontal and vertical sync on the green.
Okay.
So in the old days, as long as you had a green cable, you had a picture. because that locked the TV in this way and this way.
Right.
You didn't have color, but you had a picture.
Mm-hmm.
HDMI did the same thing. They copied component video, but made it digital. The sync was the clock, was the fourth channel. But they were smart. They figured we're going to want more out of this someday. So when they wrote the specification, all four channels, all four high-speed channels had to be equivalent inside the cable. Unfortunately, HDMI never tested that fourth channel. So most manufacturers cheesed on that channel, like putting a donut spare in the car instead of a full spare.
Mm-hmm.
So as we moved into 2.1, it became a bit of a problem for some of these cables. All four conductors, all four groups of conductors should be the same. 2.1 does it entirely differently. 2.1 was looking to solve problems at the retail store level.
Okay.
Now, you go into Best Buy or in the old day Circuit City or something like that, and you buy a TV, you buy a source and an AVR, and you take it home and you plug it in and you get little sparkles. Now, Sony doesn't want to hear about this. Denon doesn't want to hear about this. Monster Cable doesn't want to hear about this. And it probably was not a single item. It was probably a combination of the items, but replacing a single item may solve it. But nothing was actually wrong. It just wasn't right. If that
wasn't
makes
right
sense.
enough. Yeah, it wasn't right enough.
Yes. Correct. So what they've done with 2.1 in order to eliminate a lot of these potential problems is now all four high-speed channels get red, green, blue, and clock, red, green, blue, and clock, red, green, blue, and clock, and red, green, blue, and clock. And it's a little bit of a shell game going on here because they don't all have to be 12 gig for you to get a picture. They will auto-adjust and equalize to get you a picture, even if it's not the full bandwidth picture.
Okay. Okay.
In the older days, they would drop resolution down. You know, you start at 1080 and it would drop to 720 and then 480 kind of thing.
Sure.
With 2.1, instead of dropping resolution, because you're keeping 4K or 8K, what they're dropping is bandwidth. Now, this may mean what's the color depth, or what's the, is it 422, 420, 444 kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But realistically speaking, not counting ISF customers, the vast majority of people are not going to notice this when they've got a 65 to 75 sitting on a credenza, they're 12 feet back, and they're watching something off satellite cable or streaming.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the truth of the matter. There are people who will. There are absolutely customers who can see that and will see that. But they're not the majority. And the majority is where the money's made.
Sure.
So that's what they're building for. So it's a bit of a shell game, but it honestly, for the vast majority of customers, it actually makes the system work. You mentioned you were seeing some issues with your audio dropout. We're going to go back to that.
Okay.
That's an EDID problem. That's not the forward high-speed channels I talked about. That's a communication error. Your source, your AVR, and your display are dropping communication somewhere.
Huh.
And it's typically because of capacitive loading. Now, I'm going to toss an engineering trick question at you. What is a capacitor?
It's a electronic doodad that holds a charge.
Exactly. It's a battery.
Yeah.
Now, here they are. We're going to talk about rise times. Do you have dimmers in your house?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have Alexa, and you say, Alexa, turn on the light, and it goes from 0 to whatever?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. That time is called the ramp time or the rise time.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now, that is adjustable in some systems.
Yep. Yeah, I can set it in mine.
EDID is a very specific ramp time. Now, EDID does not care, clock doesn't care if the data is high or low, it just better be in one of those spots, because if it's somewhere in the middle, it's ignored. Now, the time requirements for audio are stricter than the other functions. They are stricter on purpose. They did this to let you know you're starting to get a capacitive buildup on your data bus and you need to fix your problem. It's the idiot light on the HDMI dashboard.
So we'll take my specific issue, right? And I'm curious to see what your answer for that is, or what your suggestion would be. So,
well, I'm guessing, and don't until I
I'm
say
not going to
this.
spoil it. I'm not going to spoil it.
I am guessing you either reset your gear or you unplug your cable and you plug it back in and it works again.
I never tried that. So I'll tell you what I did try. I have a cable connecting my processor and my source, and everything was working well, no problems. And it was a long cable, and there was a whole bunch of it wound up. And I said, okay, I'm sick and tired of all these long cables hanging down and all this crap. So I got a nice shorter cable and plugged it in, and everything seemed to be fine. Watching a movie, and through the movie, what would happen is the soundtrack is like this, and now the soundtrack's like this, and it go for a while. And then the soundtrack's like this, and then now it's back like. I'm like, what the, right? So I changed to another cable. Same junk. Then I changed back to the original cable. Everything is okay now. So that was my experience. Cycle through two cables, but went back to the original one. It all works, and I haven't had the problem come back. And
you're suffering a secondary problem. Your cable was too short.
It could very well have been, because it was only like that long.
Yep. Now, and how can a cable be too short? I tell you, and this is one that kind of surprised us early on. We ran into this. We were working with Pioneer. We actually provided all the HDMI cables and went out with all the original Pioneer Blu-ray players, because they wanted to make sure that when they went in the stores, everything worked properly.
Sure, right.
They weren't willing to bet on what was in a store. And what we found was if we got shorter than 6 feet, the Pioneer had problems. And here's why. The Pioneer is basically yelling at the next device in line. And with the shorter cable, there was not enough attenuation for it not to overdrive the next device.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I totally get it. I see. I'm picking up what you're putting down, because absolutely what you said is what happened. The shorter cable, it was much shorter.
Now, that's not an EDID problem. That's a TMDS problem. Remember the 4 high-speed channels I was telling you about? It's overdriving and it's heating up and it's shutting off. Cools down, boom, it's back up. Heats up, shuts off. Cools down, boom, back up.
Okay.
EDID will give you typically a complete drop of audio, or you'll see on the screen mode not supported, frequency out of range, or HDCP not supported.
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't get any error messages. It was just the volume is at normal level, and then it dropped down to almost nothing, and then it would come back up.
You were overdriving it.
Huh.
A slightly longer or thinner cable would have solved that problem.
Huh. Yeah. Longer was the change. It was a thicker cable, but it was 4 times as long or something like that.
Right. There's the attenuation in HDMI cables is very quick.
Sure. Thus the need for fiber optics and those solutions.
And you can either do, to go distance, you either do fatter gauge or repeaters, something like that in the line. And for short distances, if you're overdriving, you go to thinner gauge.
Right. That makes total sense. Yeah. So is that, if I remember correctly, in the evolution of the HDMI 2.0 approved cables, I don't know what it's called, but you had your cables, and then there was a cable that had, like, on one end was like the supercharger, right? And I guess it was a booster built in.
Well, it's more of a transporter from Star Trek.
Oh, I like that.
It's called a repeater. It's not an amplifier. We tend to think of things as, distribution units. It's not. I'm going to ask you we're going to switch over and do a little drawing.
Okay, I'm going to make you big. You've got the full screen now.
Okay, so when you're looking at a signal, you've got a high and a low. Now, HDMI is 1s and 0s. Do you know what a 1 and 0 is? It's a light switch.
Yeah, it's just is there enough
That's
signal
it.
for it to be the high or no signal to be a
Right.
low? Yeah.
The switch goes on, the signal goes up. The
Yep.
switch goes off, the signal comes down. However, the way HDMI is built, there's a clock. So it goes up, it holds a second, and then it comes down. Or it goes straight across, or it goes straight across, or it goes high, 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 and then down.
Is that a square wave?
That's a square wave, but it can't be square because it's moving too quickly.
Sure.
So in our world, they're called eye patterns. And the reason they're called eye patterns is because they wind up looking like an eye. Now, inside the middle of an eye pattern is called a mask. Now, this is you can't touch this with the signal area. As long as that maintains free of any of these highs or lows touching it, you got a good picture.
Right.
What happens over time, though, is you'll start to see collapse. Now, you can see collapse for any of a number of things. It could be that the gear's a little weak. It could be the cable's bad. It could be it's Tuesday.
Sure. So your amplitude gets less.
Right. And distance absolutely affects this. The longer the cable runs, the less amplitude you have.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, we're very high frequency and amplitude.
Yep.
So as you get longer, the frequencies will also start to lag a little bit, and they start getting closer this way because they're collapsing. You don't have enough energy for the full spike, and it also doesn't release enough energy to go all the way down.
Okay. Yeah, no, I see that. Sure.
Because it has to open and shut the door both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when that's happening over distance, that's where gauge comes in. Now, if you can't get enough gauge, and there's a limit to how big you can put on an HDMI terminal, it's effectively 24 gauge.
Yeah, I'm like, I want a 0 gauge HDMI cable.
At that point, you put in active electronics. And what an active electronic device does is as that signal starts to collapse, it becomes unreadable by the TV.
Mm-hmm.
But the processor, the math coprocessor in the active electronics can read that collapsed signal.
Oh, so it's doing stuff at the output side and not on the source side.
No, it's doing it at the display side, or the next in line side.
Yeah, okay.
It's called the sync. So it reads that collapsed signal. It does not amplify it. It creates a new signal, like a fax machine.
Right. Yeah.
Or the transporter from Star Trek.
Yep. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah. So it's not boosting the signal. It actually reads the signal and then regenerates it. Right. Okay.
And
this is awesome.
And, for example, the very first product I ever built, and this is first year HDMI was out, we were recognized by HDMI proper as an organization. Ooh, my fancy little name tag's gone. There we go. We were recognized by HDMI. We created a product called the SR1A. It allows you to go 100 feet on a 24 gauge HDMI cable at 1080p.
Right.
Because it could read that data at practically no swing between high and low and recreate it.
Got it.
So, very early on, we could hit 100 feet. As bandwidth increased, the need for better processors also increased. So we went from something effectively this size to something this size for 18 or 24.
Oh, right on.
But same thing, cool. It goes at the display side.
This is stuff that, I've seen the after effects of, but I really didn't understand any of the internal workings. This is really cool.
And when you're looking at repeaters, whether it's in the cable or standalone, its purpose is to fix sparkles.
Okay.
Because that's the failure in that eye pattern I was showing you.
Mm-hmm.
That causes the sparkles or the drop of resolution.
Right. Yep.
The audio dropout is EDID, which is an entirely separate group of wires. It's just communications. It's serial data. It's RS-232 for the old school guys.
Right on. Oh, yeah, no.
That's all it is. It's RS-232 data. Okay, what are you? Who are you? When were you built? What's your firmware? What resolution can you take? What audio do you want?
Right.
Last but not least, can you give me the secret HDMI Twizzler handshake?
Right on.
All that happens in the EDID before the high-speed stuff goes to work.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the picture and the sound, because sound rides with the picture. So anytime someone, my cable's bad, I got no audio, but I got picture. No, they're on the same wires, and audio is easy.
See, I was going to ask that, but so, okay, you answered the question, but no, I did not realize that audio is traversing on the same physical
on the same physical layer.
Okay.
The only difference is audio is not turned on the output at the source by EDID.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
Okay, so let's assume I'm a source, you're a display.
Okay.
I get plugged in, you get turned on. The very first thing I do is send you 5 volts.
Okay.
Just a doorbell. Ding dong.
Mm-hmm.
You respond with what's called hot plug. Voltage back from you. No data, no information, just something to say, hey, I'm here. How you doing? Now we start negotiating. Yeah, listen, I got a delivery for you here. Oh, who are you? Do you belong here? Did you get through security? Sure. Now, the source and the display have to negotiate resolution, bit rate, firmware, audio, security. And as mentioned earlier, audio is very specifically a very tight requirement.
Right.
Because as the same thing we saw with the eye patterns here affects rise time with capacitance on the EDID. So if your data is not going up, down, and it's not where it should be, it's not getting read, it will get ignored.
Okay.
Now, there are standards. Typically, it's from 350 to 1,000 nanoseconds is an EDID clock sweep. So it has to be somewhere high in that 350 to 1,000.
Right.
But that's typical. That's not guaranteed, and some devices are much more pickier than others. You mentioned your Kaleidoscape.
Mm-hmm.
They are very picky. They are not wrong. They have done nothing wrong. I don't want to tell you that Kaleidoscape has done nothing wrong, because they haven't. They have actually built correctly. The problem is everybody else is playing sloppy games.
Sure.
In fact, Kaleidoscape does something nobody else does. When EDID was developed by Philips for the computer world, PC world, 30 plus years ago, they gave a standard for how high the voltage had to go to be read as a 1. They never gave a fixed standard for how low it had to go to be read as 0.
All right.
No, it doesn't actually go to 0. It can't.
Right.
It doesn't actually go to 5. It goes to 4.7. And the downside, well, see, that's where it gets a little nebulous. Some devices will recognize 0.9 volts. Kaleidoscape wants to see 0.6. Nothing wrong with that. It's well within the spec. And assuming everything's built correctly, it actually works better. However, that also pretty much precludes any active cables in line with the Kaleidoscape.
I can see that. Yep. I can.
And you know that cable you mentioned with the long head shell?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's an active cable.
Right. Yep.
Because the active cables typically only go to 0.9 volts. We figured this out, dropped ours to 0.4. But it took a while to figure out. Kaleidoscape didn't know, because it wasn't Kaleidoscape, it's the chipset they buy.
Right. Sure. Right on. Well, all I know now is that I am completely sold after listening to you for a few minutes that every HDMI cable I buy is going to come from you guys, just so I know that you're out there. If I have a question, I know I can get it answered, and I need to support that. No, that's awesome.
Now, there are other things you can do. We're going to go back to this little black box I showed you. I mean, 2 black boxes in the mid 2000s. Mm-hmm. One called the SR1, which was to go 100 feet. And the other one was called the DAD, Digital Analysis Device. It has 4 little LEDs on it that monitor clock plug, hot plug, data, and HTTP.
Right.
All the EDID stuff. And we made this specifically because of audio dropouts, long time to sync, and the issues that guys were seeing. And what it simply does is strip capacitive loading off the data bus and increase the rise time, taking the mud off the tires.
Right. Sure.
So rise time's high, so everybody's happy. Now, I built this device 2007, I think, I'm guessing, for at the time, which was 1080p, which is 3.65 gigabits. We knew it would go to 5. We weren't worried about that, but it was built for 365. 3D comes along. It's like, well, I guess it's time to build a new DAD. We use a company called DPL Labs, which is a third-party certifier, kind of like UL Labs or ETL, except in digital video. So I sent this to them. It's like, can you run a test on this and let me know how well it performs so I know what we have to do on the new design. Came back, it did 3D perfect. Well, by golly, that's great. We actually changed the graphic on it to orange and white. Hey, it's new.
Perfect. Raise the price.
Not improved, just new. No, price stayed the same. But it's new. Now it does 765 for 3D. And then 10 gig came around, and then 4K came around, and I sent it in again. Yeah, you're good for 18 gig. Now, I built this. This is the very first product I built. Like, you're good for 18 gig. Oh. Okay.
The gift that keeps giving.
Now we have 48 gig. Like, okay. I got to really be pushing my luck now. There's no way this is going to do it. It didn't. But it did get me to 40. It got me to 40 gig, 10 gigs per channel, which is better than any source you can buy right now, which is the Xbox Series X.
Right on.
For bandwidth.
Right on. So that's the king of the hill then right now for the amount
The very first thing we designed still will support anything available to the consumer 15 years later, 14 years later.
I love it. Man.
Now, we have taken that and shrunken it down to that. We don't have the LEDs in it, but it does the same thing. It strips the capacitive loading off the data bus. So the rise time's fast. It also deals with the issue for Kaleidoscape, which built inside of this is a device that drops it down to 0.4 volts. So we know that there's not going to be any Kaleidoscape compatibility issues with anybody else's gear or active cables or fiber cables or extenders.
Okay, I have to buy 5 or 6 of those just to have them. Man, that's awesome.
These are the things that guys use on a regular basis. And a lot of what I've learned comes from, and this is not a joke, dealers talking with customers. We take consumer calls. I take customer calls. My cell phone number used to be right there. This is my new cell phone number. I don't hide from anybody. So my number's out there, has been since day one. And if a customer wants to call me, I'm happy to I learn things from everybody. Believe me, as much as I would love to have my lab stocked with everything in the world, it isn't. There's not physically the room, and they're not going to give me that big a budget. So the people we talk to are very, very important to us. And we started seeing issues with Apple TVs and some of the panels out there, the 4K panels. And how they fixed it is they would unplug the cable and plug it back in. It wasn't a standard EDID issue, it was a hot plug issue. Now, remember when I talked to you, I send you 5 volts to wake you up as the display, and the display sends back voltage?
Yep.
If that voltage is never interrupted, the source and TV never renegotiate. So when you change channels, change apps, go from 1080 to 4K or 4K to HDR or Dolby Vision or something like that, and you try to go back to something else, it may not shift, particularly going backwards. So I created a box that actually did hot plug. So it effectively unplugs the cable and plugs it back in for you. It does a lot of things. It actually speeds up how fast you change from one source to another. because it forces a brand new renegotiation each time instead of has something changed? I don't know. What are we
Okay.
doing?
All right. So this brings up another question then. And holy smokes, we're plowing through the time. So
Sorry.
no, it's all good. I can go all night long. So you might have to put it into it, but I still haven't even got to the tech question of the week yet, or content corner, or said hi to any of the people that are watching right now.
Well, do you want to do this again?
Oh yeah. People have already said, when are you going to schedule part 2? We will absolutely. So everybody out there, as long as Brent is willing, we will schedule part 2 and then part 3 and then part 4, and he can come back and tell us everything we need to know but anyway, back to this question. So you mentioned that this device speeds up source selection changing. So
Yes.
So, I've got I've had a number of different processors and AVRs that when you switch between HDMI inputs,
Yes.
that is, it takes forever for this thing to negotiate.
Let's step back a second. If you have a Sony projector, it's 20 seconds.
Okay.
It just is. Mm-hmm. If you have a Denon AVR, it's 8 to 12 seconds. I can get it down to 8.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yep. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. It's not just, hey, here I am. There's a lot of things to negotiate. And as we have expanded resolutions, feature sets, chipsets, when you look at, where did I do with my Apple TV? Okay, if you got an early 4K HDR device, there's actually 2 chipsets in that device. A 1.4 chipset and a 2.0 chipset.
Okay, sure. Makes sense.
The televisions, the AVRs, the sources, because they hadn't got it all down to one chip yet.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to traffic cop between the two.
Yep, I'm on board. Yep.
This delayed everything. It's like, well, what do you do? I don't know. What do I do? What do I do? Now, when you unplugged the cable and you plugged it back in, if you were on an app that required 4K HDR, it said, hey, I'm 4K HDR, and boom, away you went.
Right.
Or if you were on a channel or an app that was 1080p, it said, hey, I'm 1080p, boom, away you went. Now, obviously, for the vast majority of people out there, unplugging a cable from the back of their AVR or their source and plugging it back in is not a viable answer.
It's a non-starter, yeah.
It's a non-starter. And I had actually had 10 years ago up in New York in the, I think Yahoo or ESPN building, I don't remember which, one of my dealers having an issue, and we took my original DAD and modified it to do hot plug on and off for him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say modified it, I mean we literally opened it up and ran wires, and he just tied it into his Crestron control system. It solved his problem. And we started realizing what was going on here. It's like, hey, I've already done this.
Right. Yep.
And boom, it is a huge problem solver. And actually, my second generation, which is this one, we learned a lot the first time. It had it on the side here. You know, we just worked off the old board and put it on the side, and it got in the way. And then we had to shuffle things around for power supplies on active fiber cables, things like that. So we learned a lot. But it's a huge problem solver. Now, I need to quantify something here. You don't just stick this in your system and it works. You have to tie it to some kind of control system to tell the relay when to do that.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm with you.
Which led me to another product. Had a guy called Sony recommended a guy because he had an Apple TV and the Sony OLEDs. And early on, there were some issues. Sony got it all figured out with firmware, but there were some issues. Sony told him to buy my AIOs.
Mm-hmm.
He gets a salesman. He says, I need 6 of these in California tomorrow morning. Salesman's like, oh, yeah.
Perfect.
He sends them off. The guy calls me back 2 days later, is very, very upset because they didn't solve his problem. Because he had no way to trigger the relay.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm using OEM remotes. And so that led me to another product. I actually created an IR connecting block with a built-in double throw relay that's code learning. So,
strangely, after the discussion we've just had, that made sense to me.
So I can take an OEM remote,
Yep.
teach 2 of those buttons. Man,
That one doesn't like you on that side.
No, it does not. Teach 2 codes to this connecting block. There we go. And you can do an AIO perfectly with it. Or TV left, or motorized screen, or LED light. I don't care.
Right. Yeah.
But it's because of
switch.
something that happened to someone in the field that called me and said, here's a problem. Hell, this is an HDMI surge protector, clamps down 8,500 volts down the HDMI channels, all of them. This came from a guy up in Pittsburgh, took a hit through a cable box. Component still worked, but the HDMI port was dead on the cable box and the AVR and the television because he just straight down.
Yeah, straight through. Yeah.
And that's where this came from. So, and believe me, dealers don't have a lock on it. We've created products because of customer calls or other manufacturers need something.
Right. Right.
We are locally owned, wholly owned by one individual. We're not a corporation. I don't have to stand in front of 27 groups. It's like, guys, I need some money to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean I get every dime or request I want.
Sure.
But if the requests are valid, we're a small enough company that we can deal with it. We're also a big enough company that if we need something, everybody knows we don't make cables in America.
Right. Sure.
There's no shock there. But I sell enough cables that my manufacturer does exactly how I tell them to do it, so it's done correctly.
That's cool.
Unfortunately, that means they copy that for other people as well.
Yeah.
But that's China.
Yeah. Right on. Well, okay. So I'm going to jump in here and we're going to do a couple of things. And then I'm going to get to the tech question of the week because I just had someone ask the tech question of the week. And we're going to get to that in a minute. And he wants to know about 2.1 HDMI.
Okay.
And we're going to get to that. But before then, I want to say hi to a few people. So first off, Hi-Fi Haven. Thanks for joining the show, man. Good to see you. I think you are first comment tonight. So you win first comment. Who else is here? Double A. And he actually won the show tonight because he identified the artist of the song that I had mentioned before, which was, or actually he mentioned the song name, which was Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice. So before
really, that line was in that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you got a problem, I'll solve it. Something, and I'll revolve it. I'm sure that this guy, Audio Architects, he loves Vanilla Ice, and he would be able to quote it verbatim. But
that was 1990.
90, right on.
I think it was 90.
Yep. So I was only like a year off. Awesome. Who else do we have? Double A Hi-Fi. Joey Peacock's up in the house. What's up, man? And so if we can give Joey a 10-second answer on his question, because he asks, what is the best way to future-proof wiring for front projector setup? So ask
that's an easy one.
Advice. Yeah.
Conduit. Seriously, it's conduit.
That's very true. Just so Joey, be able to buy new cables is the best way to future-proof.
Right now we're at 48 gig.
Yeah.
And 48 gig's good for about 5 meters on a really good day downhill and neutral.
Okay.
On copper. On fiber, we're about to 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say you pull a piece of fiber. This is my, This is my 8K fiber. I'm going to do a little shilling here. That's my 8K fiber.
So I'm going to be picking one of these up because I've got, I got to get ready for this. So yeah.
Now, the nice thing about a fiber like this is there are 4 fiber conductors in it.
Mm-hmm.
And when this technology in this cable comes to an end, and it will,
absolutely,
you cut the end of the cable off. You've got 4 OM3 fibers built into this cable. You terminate it with whatever the terminal du jour, currently it's LC.
Right, yep.
And you put an extender on it with however many fibers you need to do whatever the next bandwidth is.
Yeah, I mean, the fiber will carry whatever.
It doesn't care.
Yeah, it doesn't care. It's just light flowing through the wire.
Doesn't care. So when you put in an active fiber cable, you're solving today's problem, whether it's 4K or 8K, but you're also prepping yourself for what's coming down the road.
So here's a product that Metra AV should produce and sell. And I'm making this up right now. And you
Okay.
probably already have it for sale because I don't know your portfolio. But to future proof for Joey, absolutely conduit. But what I want to see is a fiber optics cable designed for home theater use, that comes in 80 feet, 100 feet, 60 feet, 50 feet, different lengths that are pre-terminated with modular connections, right? So you don't have to, in the future, cut into your cable off and then re-terminate everything.
Here's the reason we don't do that, because we get a lot of pressure to. I get it. We get a lot of pressure to do that.
Uh-huh.
We don't know what the terminal du jour is going to be.
Well, isn't that the beauty of it though? So this is some kind of universal thing.
There isn't a universal thing.
Well, it's just to end on a piece of fiber, right? So maybe you dictate it.
You have to look at SMP modules. You have to look at, that's what plugs in the devices. You have to, there's LCs, there's STs, there's 4 primary different terminals. Now, most of our world is LCs.
Yep, LC, yep.
But not all of it. You get in the medical world, it gets different. And it's still the same. Hell, they're pickier than we are. So the advantage, and terminating fiber has gotten very easy. 20 years ago when I learned to polish fiber, it was a pain in the butt. Excuse me, 30 years ago when I learned to polish fiber, it was a pain in the butt.
Yeah, so I've never polished fiber before. That's something I need to do one day.
Those days are gone. You got to, you strip it, you cleave it, you slide the LC terminal over it. It's easier than doing an RJ45 now.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I would much rather walk somebody through doing an LC terminal than an RJ45, because there's 8 conductors in that to mess up.
Yeah. So at work, we're running some 432 strand, and I want to watch it when they're terminating that beast. That's got to be absolutely ridiculous. But no, I think that's really cool about, a capability of being able to reuse that fiber cable down the line.
Yes.
And if there was an easy way to do it for the layperson, right? So if you got a CI that can come in, clip the end, and re-terminate, and you're good to go, that's awesome. But it would be super awesome if a layperson could just take that old cable and somehow change the 2 ends of it and use it with, I don't know, whatever the new stuff is down the line. That would be really cool.
This was designed to make easier installs. It's a detachable head shell.
Sure, yeah. So you can pull it through conduit easier and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
Now, the electronics in this one are 4K.
Right.
The 8K cable, we haven't been able to get the 8K out of a detachable head shell yet.
Okay.
And it's just that picky. I'm not saying we're not going to be able to do it, but we haven't yet.
Sure. No, I like those detachable head cables. Those are cool. I mean, if you got any tight, turns to negotiate, that's definitely the thing to have to pull. Now, that's cool.
We still sell a lot of simplex and duplex bulk fiber. But I don't recommend that as your primary. I would put an AOC cable in like this, because you're ready to go right now. Now, let's talk about that real quick, because power requirements are very critical in HDMI.
Sure.
One of the things we see is guys trying to power, when you look at a fiber cable, they should be powered at least one end, if not both. I'm amazed at how many people, hey, there's a USB port on my television, I'll just plug it in there. Do you know what your typical current supply is on a TV for USB? About 250 milliamps.
Really?
That's it.
Not a lot.
Because all it's designed to do is support a stick for photos. Now, Sony has an SS port that's 900 milliamps. It's still not $1,000. So when you're looking at a fiber cable, use included power supplies. And if it doesn't come with them, go out and buy at least a 1.2 amp power supply. Now, the reason I say at least is because everybody lies about their current supply, particularly if you're not buying an Apple.
Right.
If you buy an Apple brand or a Samsung brand or an LG brand, they're going to be honest. But other than that, I wouldn't trust the numbers. I would divide it by at least 50%.
I can get on board with that. Totally. I can get on board with that.
We've tested a lot of them and they're just garbage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it kills cables. Your cable will last 6, 8, 9 months and then just die.
That makes sense.
It's starving.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer a question from Darth Simon, it's not going to be the answer that he wants to hear. I don't think, but he's looking at the Audio Control X9, which is a cool piece of gear.
It's a great sounding piece of gear.
Yeah, it does sound good. And it's 2.0 B, and so it's not supporting 2.1. He asked if he should wait. One thing that I really enjoy from processors, not AVRs, because you don't see this really in AVRs, is processors that can really have filled, replaceable, or upgradable, swappable HDMI stuff.
I'm sorry, was I laughing at you?
No, you shouldn't. I think that's super cool. I mean, all the big boys do that.
Yeah. When you get up to the price points of a Datasat or an ATI or Storm or those guys, yes, you can do that.
That's what I'm getting at. But yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Even
then, I know who makes their HDMI boards. And they are behind the curve. A D&M, a Sony, an Onkyo Integra is still going to be 18 months ahead of those guys in HDMI because they've got the financial resources to do it. Does it sound as good? No way. Nobody's going to touch a Storm or Datasat for sound quality in an AVR.
I agree with that.
As good as Moran says, it isn't. Even their pre-pros. It just isn't. The Storm stuff is amazing. A mutual friend of ours, Scott, I did the LA show with them. And I can't remember, it was the 11.2 preamp. And if you're going to do one of those, what I recommend is this. Get an outboard matrix to plug all your sources into and have dual outputs. One to your display, one to your pre-pro for the audio and Atmos. Don't run it through the pre-pro. Sorry.
I get on board with that. I actually don't care for the processors that do stuff to the video, right?
Yeah, no, they shouldn't.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't. And because some of them they'll want to inject like volume meters and all that kind of crap. All a pre-pro should do on the video side is pass it. Just pass it through.
Well, and particularly with HDR, when you look at Dolby Vision, that tone mapping, they know what they're doing. Let Dolby do their job.
Yeah. No, I am completely on board with that, and I think that's all. The top tier for me. From a processor point of view, things that I want to see from it. It's got to have that good sound quality. So I feel like I don't want to say I've graduated from, but I've moved a little bit past in my theater the Marantzes and the Denons and the Onkyos and the Pioneers and that kind of stuff.
I've watched some of your videos and I've saw where you going and really jealous of your speaker arrangements.
Oh yeah, that Stark Sound stuff is absolutely stunning. I love that.
Very jealous. The best sounding room I have ever heard at a show was the LA Audio show where I did with them with the 11.2 system, I think.
Oh, was that the big one that they had in the big pavilion and they did the big all the way around tall?
Yeah.
Though that I didn't see that room. But that stunning from what I hear back in the day. I mean, just amazing. And that's so little known fact, all of the Stark gear I have in my theater is all secondhand used stuff that I got from them. And it could very well be that some of the speakers I have were ones that were in that setup at that time, because those models were still the current model back then.
That was the most dynamic room I had ever sat in without overmodulating the audio. It was amazing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love their their H5 series stuff. The ICH5 towers and IWH5 on walls, and their center channel is really good. But it's a horizontal center channel like the other, so it suffers from all of the normal horizontal center channel issues. But it sounds great other than that. But you just use one of their on wall or in wall vertical speakers to be a real center channel behind a AT screen. No, that's cool that you're familiar with Stark. Not a lot of people know about it, so people are like, "What did you put in your theater? What is that?" I'm like, "This stuff's good." They're like, "I've never heard of them." So AA's like Stark for the win. I'm using those for the Atmos on a recent upgrade. Okay, so now
one last question for me. What are you using for amplification now?
Stark Sound. So I have a Stark Sound A7 and a Stark Sound A8. So my chain is on the source side. I've got a Kaleidoscape, their smallest, little tiniest unit, because I don't have a lot of movies, so I don't need a lot of storage. I've also got one of the Panasonic Blu-ray players. That's
an awesome machine.
Yeah, the Panasonics are really good. I've got a NVIDIA Shield, the new one.
You got one of those.
And that, if you're going to stream, in my opinion, it's a Shield or a Apple TV. Those are the best. I'm also using a Zapiti as a file player. So I've got a Zapiti. Yeah, so it's a French company, and I also have a Zadu, which is a Chinese company, I believe, and they don't stream very well, but they play any kind of file format that you could ever throw at them. So, people use them for different applications when they acquire files through different ways that they want to be able to watch.
So they're even wider than the Shield, because that has a pretty wide availability for file playback.
Yeah, it's even better than all that stuff. So it'll do like ISO file playback and give you all of the DVD menus and stuff like that. And the Shield suffers a bit at that type of functionality. But from a streaming point of view, the Shield and the Apple TV, absolutely. I mean, you can also have Rokus and stuff like that are pretty good. But for me, the tops are the Shield and the Apple TV. From my sources, I go into today. I've got an Acurus Act 4 Pre-Pro,
which is a fine Pre-Pro.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. It sounds good. My favorite thing about it. Go ahead.
I've done some work with those guys up in India, and it's
an absolutely stellar piece of equipment. And the sound quality is what really, for me, sets it apart from everything else, because it just sounds so good. And I don't want to call it a step down model, but they have a lower channel count version called the Muse, in a 16 channel. So the Act 4 is 20 channels, and the Muse sounds just as good as Act 4. I mean, the guts, I think, are pretty similar. It's just lower channel count. And it sounds absolutely awesome. From there, I go out into the Stark A8 and A7, and these run as Class A up to 50-ish watts. Yeah, 50. And then flop over to AB. Yeah, mode after that. What do they call that? Class H? Is that the common terminology for that?
Class H is the digital technology.
Okay, yeah, so it's not that. Yeah, so it's A and then flips over to AB. And I think for the most part, I'm usually running. I don't listen super loud, so I think I'm really getting a lot of out of the A capability. And those things are just they're awesome. There are other amps that do the same kind of thing out there, but for me, they're absolutely stupendous. On the subwoofer side of the house, I come out of the Acurus and I go into a mini DSP 2x4 HD for DSP work, and then from there to assorted subwoofers. And I've got one sub, and it's my favorite pre-built sub. So I do a lot of building my own enclosures to make it fit in the right spot and that kind of stuff. But I've got an older Velodyne Digital Drive Plus 18, and so it's a big daddy, and I think it was contemporary. God, it's got to be. I mean, the design on that thing's got to be 15 years old or something. I don't know, because it still has an S video port on the back.
It's longer than that. I did the in 1986. The East Coast sales guy for Velodyne's name was Sal.
Okay.
He was about that tall. And the only thing we had seen from Velodyne was a small ad in the back of Absolute Sound.
Okay.
Little tiny black and white and one of the back pages. And I was working in a store in Winter Park, Florida called Absolute Sound. We were NAD, Tandberg, Luxman, Dual, Boston Acoustic. And Sal calls. Yeah. Sal calls and said, "Hi, this is Sal from Velodyne," with the Yankee accent. I would love to come by and show you my product. And the owner of the shop, Charles O'Meara, said he can come by as long as he's gone before I get back from lunch. I really don't want to deal with any salesman today.
Right.
He brought this thing. This is the original servo drive ULD 12.
Yep.
With the separate amp and the.
We
put it on a set of KEF. Yeah, we put it on. We hooked it up with a set of KEF 105s on a Tandberg package. And the two things that we used consistently for testing back then was the Axle F. We call it the Axle F stress test.
I have no idea what that is.
Beverly Hills Cop. Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
We called it the Axle F stress test because it got very low in the registers.
Got it.
And Ein Straussfest on Telarc.
Oh, Telarc. Now that's a company right there.
They had a polka disc that was from Strauss that would peg an amp. I mean, just peg your amp out.
Love it.
We put those things on and heard stuff we had never, ever heard. It's like, oh my God. So it's like, Charles, you got to hear this. We sold the crap out of 12s and 18s.
I absolutely love that Velodyne older school stuff. And Velodyne just got bought by a gentleman
yes, they did.
In Germany, Mansour Mamangani.
Yep.
And I was talking to him not too long ago, and he's a good dude.
I think he'll do it right.
He's a good dude. And I've done a little bit of work with him, and then Mike, who was on the show a little bit before, I don't know if he's still on. He just talked to him the other day, and Mike is going to do a review of their Deep Blue 6 or something like that, the Deep Blue 12-inch or 10-inch sub, their new one. But I hear some secret rumblings that I can't really talk about. But I mean, this information is probably a year old now, that some big stuff from the past might make a return in a new form factor, which is exciting because the brand just brings a lot of nostalgia back. If they have performance anywhere around that digital drive 18 plus, man, I love it.
The subwoofer led to LiDAR.
Absolutely. And then LiDAR led to splitting the company and new owner.
And wives.
Yeah, we won't get into all that though. All right. So Brent, I'm going to fast forward in the episode right now. And I usually do content corner. I'm not going to talk about that now because the movie I was going to talk about, which is The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. Movie's good. If you like that kind of stuff, go watch the movie. It's not going to be anything that stuns you audibly or visually. It's story driven, and you have to really be into that genre to say this is something you have to watch. If you like that kind of stuff, then you'll like it because I think they did it well. And the effects, the horror effects, and the music, and the transient that they put in, like the dynamics they put into music to startle you were there. But it wasn't anything that would give your system like a huge workout. So that's all I'll say about that now. But what I would like to do is now ask you the tech question of the week. All right. And the tech question. Yeah, I know. Dun, dun, dun. The tech question of the week. And that question is, what is HDMI 2.1 and should people want it?
Well,
and I'm going to make you big on the screen here. You've got the solo layout.
Oh boy, this is a tough one, Giles, and I'll tell you why. 2.1 is applicable if they want to use 2.1 sources. Now that's an Xbox Series X, a PlayStation PS5, the new Apple TV 4K. And assuming they have a display and an AVR and we are 18 months from it being a valid, safe connectivity, not from a reliability standpoint, but just being able to go out and buy gear. I'm sure you've noticed that shopping for anything right now is very, very hard because there's nothing available.
Nothing.
And that's not going to change in the near future. There's little bits dribbling in, and a few AVRs from Accio Integra or a D&M here and there, but There's no chips, there's no plastic, there's no metal, there's no people to go to work. Vietnam shut down. China's back in COVID testing. We can't get boats to pull stuff across the ocean. Can't even get crates to put stuff on to put them on the boats.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you physically have the product or you're planning a big install, I would not go crazy over it, because just like in the early days with 2.0 and 2.0 4K TV shipped that didn't support HDR, didn't support deep color, didn't even properly support HDCP 2.2. We last year at CES, we showed a Samsung 8K to prove that our cable did 8K. We actually had an 8K generator made by Meridio. It was a one-off, phenomenal piece of gear. As far as I can tell, we were the only actual 8K signal legitimate on the CES show floor a year and a half ago. Last CES, pre-COVID. Brought that TV back, got my Xbox Series X over there, plugged it in. It didn't support 4K 120. So we had to go out and buy another TV. So you need to determine what your goal is. What are you going to be able to buy? What are you going to be able to use? If you're still running your world in a streaming format, you don't need 2.1 today because it's not there. You know, maybe in some parts that Google Fiber's at, you might be able to get the bandwidth. But the rest of the world, it's just not there.
Right.
It's heavily compressed anyway. So now as to what 2.1 is, 2.1 is potentially 48 gigabits. Right now it's 40.
So is so the top end for the specification would be 48 then, and
Yes.
Are they waiting on the electronics and all the devices to catch up with the capability of the cable, or?
Yes. Now the cables, look, when we DPL a cable for 48 gig, it's DPL for 48 gig. It's not DPL for 40 or 32 or what. It's DPL for 48.
That makes sense.
If the cable is 48, it's 48. And you're going to start seeing a lot of cables being 48 just by default because it's good. Do you remember when we went from HDMI 1.2 to 1.3 and they touted Ethernet, HDMI over Ethernet over HDMI?
Yeah, I heard about that for a short period of time.
Do you know how many devices were ever built that supported Ethernet over HDMI?
I never saw one that I can think of. Yeah.
0.
There we
However, the only difference between an HDMI 1.2 cable and a 1.3 cable was one additional wire got moved to a secondary pin. I couldn't sell a 1.2 cable. They were garbage. They were garbage.
Right.
They did everything that a 1.3 cable could do.
But nobody wanted them.
But nobody wanted them.
Yeah, nobody wanted them. That's funny. Right on.
No, it's really not.
It is.
It's sad.
It's not funny, haha. It's funny, sad.
It's sad.
But that's the real world, you know.
That's the world we're living in. Look,
yeah.
If you're planning a job, put the infrastructure in place for 8K.
I want that. I don't know why I have a burning desire for that, but I have a burning desire for that cable right now.
If, however, you're not going to put an 8K or 4K 120 system in, you don't have to spend that additional. You don't have to go out and replace what you've got, is what I'm saying.
Right. That makes total sense.
If you're starting from scratch, plan accordingly because it's coming. But don't go out and oh my God, I got to have 8K cables, but I have no 8K content.
Sure. So let me ask if this is reasonable then, if you think this is reasonable from a consumer's point of view. So somebody who's going to go buy something new right now.
Okay.
If you were going to purchase a device, and I'm thinking AVR type stuff, right? Or processor, right? So that device that sits in between your display and your sources. And you had the choice of picking up something today, right now, but you don't have any kind of external push, right? This is just, you can do whatever you want to. So you could buy a device today that's 2.0 B or whatever it is. Or if you wait a month and it doesn't hurt you to wait that month, you could pick up something that's 2.1. What would you do?
Well, I live with this every week. I literally live with this question every week.
Right. Yep. And
One of
that's
the
why I'm
advantage-
asking you, because I know you know. Yeah.
One of the advantages of my job is I know every major manufacturer out there.
Mhm.
I have a very good relationship with every major manufacturer out there. And that does come with some nice little perks.
Mhm.
I do things for them, they do things for me. Today, right now, let's see. The question is, are we talking Fantasyland or are we talking reality of what's available?
Fantasyland. Let's just call it Fantasyland. Let's call it
Fantasyland,
Fantasyland.
Fantasyland, I would absolutely wait. We are way too early in the 2.1 chipset development, and there's already been issues with PlayStations and certain brands of AVRs and Xboxes. And it's nobody's fault. It's everybody's fault because there was not enough sharing of information beforehand.
Makes sense. Yep.
Unless I just got to have it today, I would put the infrastructure in for it and wait. Never buy the first year model of any car.
And I've got one right now, and you know what? Never buy the first year model of any car. Never, ever. Because
look, if you went out and you bought the Sony first 4K Sony TV, Sony had to send out a repair guy to replace the board to give you HDCP 2.2. If you went out and bought the very first Sony 4K media server, that round thing.
Oh man, that's going back.
It didn't work with any of their 4K TVs that they were selling until the guy came out and replaced the board in your television.
I guess that's kind of like the Apple headphones that won't play the new high-res Apple Music.
Then there's that one.
Right?
So
cool. So I guess
honestly,
to sum it up, then maybe 2.1 is a future technology, and down the line, things are going to bake and cook, and there'll be a beautiful cake down at that point. But today,
well, here's the thing: by the time they get 2.1 figured out, we'll have 3.1. They have just now got 2.0 stable.
Sure.
But now we got 2.1. But it works.
Makes sense. Right on.
And look, it's a purely mercantile attitude. They have to keep selling product. They do. So infrastructure, if you can put the infrastructure for 8K in or 48 gig, because it could be 4K 120. Personally, 8K doesn't excite me, but 4K 120 does.
I agree with that.
What really excites me is 4K 444 12-bit color.
Oh, now you're talking my language.
Me.
Yeah, that you're talking my language.
The 120, not so much, but give me 444 and 12-bit or 16-bit color. That excites me.
Yeah, and I want a projector that I can actually afford that would be able to use.
I've got, at 110 inches, the difference between 4K and 8K is going to be reasonably negligible on my 110. However, you give me 12 or 16-bit color and 444, that's really going to be visible on that 110.
Yeah, that's going to make you a happy man right there. No, I totally get it. I agree.
Honestly, in the early days of 4K, I'd much rather have had 1080p 12-bit than 4K anything.
Sure.
Because color saturation, to the human eye, color saturation is more pleasing than resolution. Ooh, the alarm's about to go off here.
Yeah. No, I can hear it beeping. It is.
Yeah. They told me it's automatic, that I'll be locked in forever.
Yeah. Well, they don't let you leave anyway. That's what I heard.
Like, no, the phone just goes home with me. My official hours are from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week, Eastern Standard Time. Right on.
Well, I think at this point, we're going to put a cork in the end of this one. I'm going to reach out to you after this so we can schedule part 2, because there's so much more that I think we can talk about. And hopefully everybody that's been watching, they'll have a list of questions for me so that while we talk about all this stuff, maybe we can hit what they want to hear about specifically. But let me say thank you for coming on the show. I do want to throw
one more thing out there. There's a lot you and I talked about, and there's a lot we couldn't.
Yeah.
Not because of politics, just time.
Yeah.
At Metra AV on our YouTube site, we do a live broadcast every Wednesday at 3 p.m. that's obviously taped.
Yep.
So it's up there, and we've covered pretty much tomorrow is IR. You know, how to setting up your IR systems. But we cover a lot of HDMI, and there's a lot of stuff there. There's no super secret sensitive, so it's wide open to anybody. You are going to want to be a techie or a hobbyist to enjoy it. But it's a lot of fun. Adam and I have a great time doing it. My co-presenter.
Absolutely.
He's a C4 programmer. I'm a Crestron programmer, which leads to conflict there.
Savant. No, I'm kidding.
I'm not qualified to have an opinion of that. When I did take C4 programming class, and I understand going from C4 to Crestron is a whole lot easier than going from Crestron to C4.
Okay.
I think it was just too damn simple, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
Right on. So let me echo what you said. Everyone that's watching, please go to YouTube, and I'll have the link down below so you can link directly there to it. But if you don't follow the link while you're there, search for Metra AV, M-E-T-R-A A-V. And when you find it, push the little button that says subscribe.
Yes, please, because he's way ahead of us in subscribers.
That's all relative, man. There's so many people way ahead of me. I'm a small fry. And then there's a bell.
How do you think I feel?
Yeah, I the same way I do. Absolutely. But the next important thing they need to click on is the bell.
For notifications.
Absolutely. Because being subscribed is awesome. And I thank you for subscribing. And he thanks you for subscribing. But the super secret sauce is when that bell is dinged, you'll be notified when something new comes. And I guarantee you, if you do any of this stuff yourself, or you want to understand what's going on in your system, the stuff that Brent and Adam talk about are the things that you want to know about. I mean, that's where the rubber is really meeting the road, and that's where things get really interesting. Because when you're building this stuff, it's a whole different game.
The show is called Tech Tips, and it's based entirely on the phone calls we get.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How do we solve this?
Ice, baby.
So, okay, not for nothing. And I know the jokes are coming. I drive a Miata.
I'm saying nothing.
My third one, and coming in tonight was 12 inches from the 80s. So okay. I had Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Eurythmics.
I love the Eurythmics.
It tops down, the wind's in my hair, and I'm in a Miata listening to Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So yeah.
Live your best life. Live your best life. And folks, with that, we're going to call it a night. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, after you've subscribed to Metra AV, subscribe to this one. And if you're watching now, you can just click and subscribe. I would appreciate it very much. Your mom will love you more for doing it.
I'll certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching, everybody. Again, Brent, thank you so much for your time and being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me. And I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh no, this is my favorite thing to do, and you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much. And everybody out there, as I say every week, thanks, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Have a great one, and thank you for joining us.